old people are...
became...
All people become good people. Yes. How to manipulate the brain so all people become good people. Oh, I wish. It depends on what you mean by good, right? So, we've evolved. I mean, humans are complex. Behavior is complex. And the problem is, so we're getting to the point where we can maybe, I think, more at the genetic level. So we're looking at which genes code for brain development. I think once the brain is fully developed, it's hard to go in, because human behavior is so complex. There's not like one circuit that codes for bad behavior, and then we can just knock that out. It's much more complicated than that. But I think if we look at things like psychopathy or psychopaths, we're starting to understand that a little bit better. And if we can go down to the genome and understand the genes that code for psychopathy, I think with things like CRISPR and genetic modification, perhaps we can go in at that level and start to change things. But because human behavior is so complex and it's not as simplistic as one specific circuit, it would be very hard to do something like that. And with everything you take away, there's always an unforeseen consequence, right? So if you made everybody altruistic, that might not be the best for all of society, because there are some people who are cheaters or evolve for certain reasons, or some people who are risk takers are important, and we need those people to take the risk. So I think it's very complex, and there's no one definition of what it really good means. Carlos?
Thank you. Are you ready to receive a chip yourself?
Your
brain? Are you ready to receive a chip in your brain?
That's a good question. Well, somebody asked me, I think that I'm really interested in time perception because, our one most limited resource is our time, right? Our time is limited. So if I could have and I'm really concerned with this. I really don't want to die. Like I have pretty much of a fear of dying. I don't want to lose consciousness. But if I can insert an electrode that can manipulate my sense of time, so that even though we're in these small moments, I'll perceive them as lasting forever in a way that might give me a sense of immortality. So if there's a chip for that, I'd get it.
Doesn't work. I have a question here. How much of the emotions is innate? I mean, you were born with it, and how much is learned? Like you see your mom, how she reacts to being sad or being happy, and you learn from it.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Temperament you have very early on. So if you can actually, there's studies that show with a baby, the way they're crying or if they're fussy or not, translates to how their whole personality will develop in life. So we are born with certain predispositions towards, let's say, different personality traits. We're born with an innate ability to feel things, to have just pure sensation, right? When I talk about consciousness, I just mean you don't need language for it, you don't need words, you don't need anything, just feeling pain. And I think we're born with that capacity. You don't learn really to feel pain, it just happens, we feel it. And I think it's the same thing with emotions. But then when you get into psychiatric illness, a lot of that, there's a genetic predisposition, and then usually a stressor will bring out so we call it the psychiatric break or something. So if you're prone towards depression, but some people have this very early on. So I don't think that psychiatric illness or emotional disorders are learned. I do think that there is a strong genetic component interacting with the environment. But the simple capacity to feel emotion, that is, we are born with that. It's just how the brain operates. Yeah.
Vamos a la pregunta aquí en la fila, por favor.
Bueno, sí, la pregunta es para los que...
Oh wait, let me put this in so I know what you're saying. Hold on. Okay.
La pregunta es para los que nos dedicamos en alguna forma a la creatividad. ¿Cuál sería tu consejo para bajar esa barrera que existe y ser más creativos e encontrar esas conexiones que no existen, sin tener que ponernos un chip en el cerebro?
Yes, you don't need to implant a chip to become more creative. So this is my advice for that. It's about letting go. So if you're trying to work on a novel or something, or think of something creative. Okay, I'm going to take a step back. Consciousness has a limited capacity for how much variables it can keep in mind at any given time. The unconscious has an unlimited capacity. We haven't found the limit yet. So a lot of times we take in information consciously, and then when you don't think about it, it's called deliberation without attention. It allows the unconscious to work on it in a much more complex way, right? It can manipulate many variables. And then when people all of a sudden have these moments or flashes of insight, it's when the unconscious has been working on the information without you having to think about it, and then it suddenly comes into consciousness. And with creativity, it's similar. Your unconscious is working on a lot of these things all the time. Let's say you're working on even if it's solving a math proof, or writing a book, or doing some painting. It works on it, and allowing that information to not think. You have to allow yourself to not think, which means go for a walk, just daydream. Turn off that prefrontal cortex, which is like, I gotta think about it, I gotta be creative now. The more you try to be creative, the less creative you'll be. So it's kind of counterintuitive, is to let go and let the unconscious kind of filter its way through the surface, and that's where I think most of creativity comes from, when you get into those flow states. It's when you lose your sense of self. So it's about letting go. Go for a walk. That's my best advice. In the woods.
Les pido si pueden formarse aquí quienes más quieran hacer preguntas. Una y una, por favor.
Hola. Yo.
Oh.
Acá hay.
Which one?
Me?
Is there any research on sexual dysfunction? And also, I'm sorry, you already answered that, but I'm not very sure.
Okay. So sexual dysfunction and psychopathy? Yeah, so basically people who are psychopaths, or now it's technically called antisocial personality disorder, and also depends on the type of sexual dysfunction, but if you mean kind of basically lack of impulse control. It's the same thing with antisocial personality disorder. You get decreased activation, specifically in a part of the prefrontal cortex called the orbital prefrontal cortex. And so people go for that immediate pleasure despite the consequences. But there are different types of psychopathy. There are some people who actually have overactivation of the prefrontal cortex as well. And they're very manipulative. They sort of lack empathy. So there's the type of people that are just going for immediate impulses, and they sort of go and murder someone impulsively because they don't think about the consequences, and they're sociopaths. But there are other people who are very controlled, but they lack empathy, so they'll do anything for personal gain in a very methodical way. And it also involves the prefrontal cortex, but in one case it's underactivated, in the other it's sort of increased activation and lack of emotional areas that are active, like the amygdala. It's similar with certain types of lack of impulse with sexuality as well.
Les pido por favor que sean breves sus preguntas. Respuesta.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Buenos días. Mi pregunta es, tú hablabas al principio acerca de la comprensión del contexto para poder interpretar la información que estamos percibiendo, matizarla con la emoción, etc. Mi pregunta es, ¿están haciendo algo al respecto para tratar personas con síndrome de Asperger en cuestiones de estimulación a través de electrodos o algo así?
Yeah. So things like Asperger's and also autism are very difficult to treat. So these kind of implants are only really good for disorders where we know where the circuit, where the damage is. So the thing that's the rate limiting step is understanding the actual circuits involved in the disorders. Now things like Asperger's and autism involve, the brain is sort of connected up differently across the board. So there's no one place that we can go in and intervene. So most of those things are going to be behavioral modifications. We can't really do it at the neural level because there's so much going on. It's the same thing with schizophrenia. Like schizophrenia involves so many different neurochemicals and different neurocircuits in the brain. There's not one place that's like this where we can go in and intervene. So again, it's only going to be appropriate to certain disorders. But with those kinds of disorders, like Asperger's and autism, is that we are understanding more about the genetic aspects to it, and I think those are some of the disorders that are going to be more amenable to genetic modification rather than the neural implants.
Thank you very much.
So I feel like we are facing like new sociocultural tendencies, such as the delay of marriage or like the delay of motherhood. So I don't know if there's some kind of like scientific explanation on the brain related to that sociocultural movements.
For the what? Say it.
Like the delay of marriage or the delay of motherhood. or maybe like the...
Oh, like why people delay marriage or delay motherhood?
Yeah, I don't know if there's some scientific explanation about that. Or
I think
it's
it's
generational.
Yeah, I think that's more of an evolutionary biology question. So there's some studies that show that people tend to have children earlier on when they're in a more where resources are more scarce and there's more uncertainty about their future survival. Then you tend to actually find that people have children at younger ages. When you live in a more secure society where you know you're safe and you're going to have access to food and water and things like that, people actually tend to hold off having children because they don't feel that evolutionary pressure that it needs to be done right now because who knows what's going to happen tomorrow. So I think there are more evolutionary explanations. There are some neurobiology things, and they have to do with neurochemistry and things like oxytocin, which is a bonding chemical that is released during orgasm. It's also released during childbirth and during breastfeeding that bonds people together. And some people have more of it, some people have less of it, and that relates to how much you want to kind of, I think, more to the marriage question as well. But if you hug someone, this is great work by Paul Zak, if you hug someone for 10 seconds, it releases oxytocin and it brings you a bond closer together. So hugging is good for everyone. Is there enough time for anything?
Perdón. We will have a problem because of the timing. I will ask you to do like 3 questions and that you answer briefly and 3 questions there. But I want to let you know, les quiero decir a todos, de que todos los speakers van a estar todo el día con nosotros. Ahorita viene un break de 1 hora, allí van a estar y van a poder acercarse a hacerles preguntas. Entonces, you will have the opportunity and the chance to talk with the speakers in this occasion. It's different than in Idea City, they will be all around. También decirles que después de 3 preguntas muy rápidas, y 3 allí, para que ya se sienten los demás, lo siento, pero van a poder platicar con ellos. Van a haber donas, afuera hay unas donas de Rosetta, ¿sí? Los quiero incentivar a que pregunten rápido. Las donas de Rosetta son para comérselas. Okay, so 3 questions very quickly and 3 answers very quickly. 3 together, vas. Dispara.
Hi. Is the idea that free will is an illusion a scientific consensus, or is there still hope for free will?
Okay, wait. Tu pregunta.
Okay, free will.
Good morning. Thank you for your lecture. I would like to know what is the role who plays dopamine oxidation in the development of diseases such as Parkinson and Alzheimer, and is it possible to take any antioxidant therapy in order to prevent
the role of what did you say?
Of dopamine oxidation in the development of Parkinson of diseases such as Parkinson or Alzheimer, and is it possible to take any antioxidant therapy in order to prevent?
Similar to the first question, what does the uncertainty principle in quantum mechanics say about determinism and free will?
Okay, good. So I can roll this into one. Okay, those 3. Okay. So free will. So again, the Cartesian definition again is everything is the same, exactly the same. Every neuron is firing exactly the same way. You could have chosen otherwise. And according to neuroscience and that. It's pretty much, we all are on the same page with that. There's something called compatibilism, so that doesn't mean, so there's one, if determinism were true, it would mean that since the Big Bang, everything, the way that we're acting is all predetermined. And I don't sort of go along those lines, but there are people who are compatibilists, so even though you don't have free will, there's still some randoms. I'm sort of trying to combine these two, and it's hard, and it's getting confusing. But the thing about quantum mechanics and uncertainty principle, a lot of people ask about that. Just because there's uncertainty at the quantum level doesn't mean that it scales up to whether a neuron fires or not. And the brain also is an environment where it's sort of, the temperature is in such a way that those properties that are happening at the quantum level. So for example, if it scaled up to the macro level, then you might suddenly just disappear and reappear over there, right? But that doesn't happen. So just because you can't conflate the two, if there's uncertainty there, then it's uncertainty whether a neuron's going to fire or not. So theoretically, if I knew everything about your brain, how it was wired, and every experience you had, and every neurochemical in your brain, I could predict whether you're going to go left or right. And with new neuroimaging, we can look at, we say go left or right, and up to 10 seconds before you're even consciously aware of which way you're going to go, we can decode the brain activation and predict with great certainty if you're going to go one way or the other. So I think the concept of free will is illusion. However, studies show that if you tell people they don't have free will, they're more likely to act unethically and cheat and things. So It evolved, the illusion evolved for a behavioral, for a purpose.
Preguntas ahí muy rápido.
Oh, I forgot his question. I'll do it in a minute. The oxidation. Okay.
Neuroscience do for memory loss?
Memory loss. Okay.
Just regarding these images of brain activity, how reliable are them as far as to detect exactly which group of cells are active, and so how comparable are they between people, between different subjects? That's my question.
Okay.
Hi, well, my question is, what is the relation between subconsciousness and emotions or feelings?
And emotion?
Emotions.
Okay. I feel like this is like an IQ test for me. I gotta like remember everything. Okay, so, oh my God. So, memory. There are ways to increase memory behaviorally. There are a lot of things you can use, mnemonics, and use kind of outside props to kind of prop up your memory. However, there's new studies now that actually, with the implants, you can help improve memory. I think that we're going to get closer and closer to. So we're not going to be able to, let's say, maybe cure Alzheimer's anytime soon. Hopefully we will eventually, but we're closer to actually being able to increase memory capacity by implanting these electrodes in parts of the brain like the hippocampus that are involved in memory. Emotion versus consciousness. So consciousness basically is anything that you feel. So emotions are one of those things that you can feel, but so is experiencing the color red or hearing a sound. So it's pure subjective experience. An emotion or thought is just one of those many things that can come into consciousness at any given time, if that makes sense. And then let's see, the last one was the dopamine. I'm not sure about the antioxidants. I don't really know that much about it, but I mean, dopamine is obviously involved in things like Parkinson's. And what's interesting about that is the treatment is that you give them more dopamine, but if you actually, too much dopamine can make you have hallucinations and delusions. So sometimes on these anti-Parkinson's medications, they start having that, and you have to decrease the medication. So, and then also with schizophrenics, when you treat them to decrease their dopamine, they might start having some Parkinsonian symptoms. So it's interesting the balance of these neurochemicals in the brain, and if they're off by just a little, you can get problems. I don't know, I think that's it.
Señoras y señores, un super aplauso, Heather, por favor. Muchísimas gracias. 40 minutos en punto y sigue el Día del Conocimiento. Es un break. Coman donas, platiquen con nosotros.